Right, at this point we are moving on to the probability part of this unit. So our big idea for probability is knowing about probability helps us to compare events, solve problems, and understand the real world. Today our concept is to demonstrate an understanding of how to use words to describe the likelihood of event, how likely it is that something happens. We'll be using language in a number of different situations, comparing spinners, conducting, and possibly describing your own experiments. Alright, if an event is likely to happen, we describe it as being probable. If an event is unlikely, not very much chance that it's going to happen, it is described as improbable. Here we have Luis, who has coins in his pocket. He has 9 pennies, 2 nickels, and 2 dimes. If one coin falls out, how likely is it that this coin is going to be a quarter? Well, he didn't have any quarters in his pocket, so it would be improbable, and in fact it would be impossible. There was no possibility at all that it could have been a quarter because there are no quarters. The possibility that it is a dime. Well, there are 2 dimes, but there are also 9 plus 2, 11 other coins, so it's unlikely or improbable that it was a dime. Same thing goes for the nickel, as again there's only 2 of them and there would be 9 other coins between the dimes and the pennies, so it's unlikely. Last we have the penny. Well, there are 9 pennies. So there are 9 more chances it's going to be pennies as opposed to 4 chances for nickels and dimes. So it's likely or probable that it would be a penny. It is most likely that it will be a penny. The probability of an event is a measure that is how likely it is that that will happen. And I know in our daily practice we have actually been working with probability as a fraction. The probability that it would be a penny would actually be 9 out of 11, because there are 13, because there are 13 coins altogether and 9 of them are pennies. So we can also use fractions to help us communicate with probability, although our goal is to use primarily words, but that would be a great way to extend your thinking and demonstrate a deeper understanding. We might also use words like most likely. It's most likely to be a penny. It is unlikely that it's going to be a dime or a nickel. And actually, you could also say that it's equally likely for it to be a dime or a nickel, because there was 2 dimes and there was 2 nickels, so they had an equal chance. Sometimes we can use a number line to show how likely something is. If it's possible, if it's impossible, how close to impossible is it? How unlikely is it? It was pretty unlikely that it was going to be a dime or a nickel. It was fairly likely that it was going to be a penny. So you can use a number line as well to help you communicate or determine the likelihood of an event. The vocabulary that we are going to use for probability for the most part is possible, impossible, and certain. If it's certain, that means there's no other possibility. It's for sure going to happen. We might also discuss using less likely, more likely, and equally likely. We're going to do a quick little practice. Look carefully always for the vocabulary words that are provided in the question and use those words. Do not use any of the other ones. Use the words that they've asked you to use. Press pause now and practice using the words impossible, possible, and certain to describe the likelihood of the events here. Alright, well, let's take a look. She's tossing an eraser. So first of all, we need to consider what are the possible outcomes of this experiment. Well, it could land on its side, it could land on one of its ends, it could land on a flat side. We've got a couple other options here. Okay, so let's take a quick peek. Landing on its side. Well, how many sides are there on a eraser? Alright, let's pretend I've drawn myself a little rectangular prism eraser, since that's the shape that a lot of them are. I'm thinking of your white erasers. The possibility that it will land on its side. Well, how many sides does it have? Well, it has one on the bottom, the top, the longer side, and the other side. So 4 sides. So that's fairly likely. I would say for sure it's possible. Landing on its ends. This end or this end. It's possible. Likelihood that it will split apart. Split apart when you drop an eraser? Pretty impossible. Likelihood that it will bounce? Well, it's definitely possible. Likelihood that it will roll? I suppose that's possible as well. So we can use those words to describe how likely something is to occur. When we're looking at outcomes, the outcomes that are more likely have a higher chance of happening. Let's take a look. We're going to continue on to the next lesson. This time we're looking at spinners. Here we have a spinner that has 7 equal sections. Okay, it's important to look at the size of your sections when you're looking at spinners, and as much as possible divide them into equal-sized pieces. This one's already divided into equal-sized pieces. There are 7 possible outcomes, so it's possible that you could land on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there are 7 possible outcomes. An outcome that is possible, you could land on a 3. Other outcomes that are possible, you could land on 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, or 7. You could not land on an 8. Landing on an 8 is impossible. Anything that is not on the spinner is impossible. So 9, 10, 11, 12, all not on the spinner. All impossible outcomes. Here we have another spinner. This one is divided into 4 sections. Each section is equal. The outcomes that we have, well, 8, 8, and 8, so we only have one outcome. That outcome is 8. So it is certain that we will land on 8 because there are no other possible outcomes. So that would be certain. Here we have one more spinner to look at. Again, it has 8 equal sections, which is important. There are 2 sections that are labeled A. There are 2 sections that are labeled C. So it is equally likely that you will land on an A or a C. There's only one section labeled D, or sector I guess they call it, labeled D. So D would be less likely than A or less likely than B. And in fact, it's also less likely than C. All 3 are more likely to happen than to land on D. It is most likely or more likely that you'll land on B, because B actually has 3 sections. If we wanted to use our fraction, we could say the likelihood of landing on a B is 3 out of 8, because there are 8 parts. And definitely B is more likely, D is less likely, and C and A are equally likely. Alright, now it's your turn to practice. We have a spinner to look at here. Gina and Tabor are playing a game with this spinner. Gina wins a point if the pointer lands on a triangle. Tabor wins a point if the pointer lands on a square. Is this a fair game? Use these words, more likely, less likely, and equally likely, to explain your answer. Press pause and think about this one now and be ready to explain. Alright, so let's take a look. What have we got? Well, we've got equally sized sections. There are 8 sections altogether. What are our possible outcomes? Well, we could land on a square, we could land on a triangle, or we could land on a circle. So there are 3 possible outcomes, which is more likely and which is less likely. More likely. Well, what do we have the most of? We have the most of squares, because there are 4 of them. So it is more likely to land on a square. It is less likely to land on a circle. There is only 1 circle out of all of the 8 sections. It is equally likely. Nothing is equally likely here. There's no same numbers, so nothing is equally likely. So if they're playing this game, and it's Gina and Tabor, Gina, remember, wins a point if she lands on a triangle. Well, there's 3 triangles. It's fairly likely she'll land on a triangle. Tabor wins if it lands on a square. Well, there are more squares, so it's more likely that Tabor is going to win because he has a better chance. There are 4 out of 8 squares. Half of them are squares, whereas for Gina there are 3 out of 8 triangles, not quite half. So it is more likely that Tabor will be the winner of this game. All right, you're on to concept practice. You are just using words to describe the likelihood of an event: possible, impossible, certain, likely, equally likely, more likely, and so on. Page 274, 275, numbers 1, 2, 4, and 5. And on page 278, numbers 1, 2, and 7. You'll be looking at spinners as well as other experiments, etc., that will relate to probability. Of course, as you have any questions, make sure that you ask.